"Dad, don't drink from that cup. The new mom put poison in it," Joseane said, leaving her father, Fabiano, completely stunned. He looked at the cup with suspicion and, silently, decided to switch them. Fabiano was a man who, on the outside, seemed unbreakable, like a rock, but on the inside, his heart bore deep scars. He was a widower and the father of an 8-year-old girl named Joseane, and ever since his wife, Eduarda, had passed away the day Joseane was born, he was never the same. Eduarda had died in childbirth, and that day, which should have been one of the happiest of their lives, became the saddest and darkest for Fabiano. Fabiano's life was marked by strict routines. He believed that if he followed every step, every schedule, he could provide his daughter with a minimally organized life, even though he felt shattered inside. Every morning, he would wake up early, prepare breakfast for Joseane, and the two would have a brief conversation, with him trying his best to smile at her, hiding his heavier emotions. He would walk her to school, always holding her hand firmly, as if that contact could protect her from anything. Despite all the pain he carried, Fabiano refused to show his sadness around Joseane. He saw himself as a shield for his daughter and, at the same time, a guardian of Eduarda's memory. But each day was a silent battle. Guilt weighed heavily on his heart, even though he knew, rationally, that there was nothing he could have done to change fate. He questioned himself, in moments of solitude, wondering if he could have somehow prevented the tragedy. These questions never had answers, but they haunted him constantly, especially at night, when the house was completely silent and he was left alone with his thoughts. Joseane, even so young, seemed to sense her father's sadness. She was a sensitive, quiet child, and many times she looked at Fabiano with an unusual maturity for her age. It was as if she somehow understood the weight he bore. She never directly asked him about her mother, as if, intuitively, she knew that bringing up that subject might hurt him even more. But, in small gestures, she tried to bring light into his life. She would leave little drawings beside his bed, often depicting a happy family, with herself, her father, and a smiling woman, whom she imagined to be Eduarda. Fabiano's pain and guilt were so immense that, sometimes, he felt unable to fully return his daughter's affection. He recognized this but didn't know how to handle it. Each drawing, each smile from Joseane, was a reminder of both what he still had and what he had lost. It was a quiet, almost monotonous afternoon in a white-walled conference room with few windows, where the voices of those present seemed to echo. Fabiano, now in his 40s, entered the room with determined steps, but with a somewhat closed-off heart, as if trapped by invisible walls. Years of work and responsibility had given him a serious demeanor, a kind of armor he wore to face the world outside. He felt safe that way, protected, keeping everyone at a distance, because emotions and feelings were complicated things, full of nuances that he preferred to avoid. It was during one presentation, after another, that he noticed a different presence in the room. Lewin, a young assistant who had been working there for only a short time, was focused on jotting down important points from the meeting. Her gaze was calm, and she listened attentively to every word with a lightness that almost seemed to contradict the company's formal atmosphere. Amid a routine of serious expressions and sharp voices, Lewin brought a gentle energy, almost as if her presence brought a bit of light to that gray room. The meeting continued with heated discussions, charts, numbers, and strategies, but Fabiano, no matter how hard he tried to concentrate, found himself stealing glances at Lewin out of the corner of his eye. She was very different from the people he was used to interacting with. There was a visible empathy in her, something rare to find in such a competitive environment. It was as if, by listening to each person, she could grasp more than just their words. Fabiano noticed that she would nod slightly, showing understanding and attention, which made everyone feel at ease, as if they were truly being heard. At the end of the meeting, when everyone was ready to leave, Lewin approached Fabiano with a gentle smile that took him by surprise. She seemed to know that he was a man of few words, and yet she showed no hesitation. She said something simple about how she found the way he led the discussions interesting, with clarity and assertiveness, but without ever imposing himself. It was a genuine compliment, but something about that gesture caught Fabiano off guard. He responded with a brief, slightly bewildered smile, and their conversation extended for a few minutes. Lewin shared a bit about how she enjoyed observing people, understanding their emotions and motivations, something that helped her be a better assistant because, according to her, empathy was a powerful tool for connecting with others. Fabiano, in turn, talked about the years he had dedicated to his career, how it fulfilled him but also kept him away from deeper feelings. He didn't expect to open up so much, but something about Lewin made him feel safe, almost as if he were talking to someone he had known for years. As she listened, her eyes stayed fixed on his, and Fabiano realized that this rare and sincere connection was affecting him in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if, in that brief moment, all the walls he had built over the years had been gently pushed aside, giving way to an almost forgotten feeling. The feeling of being understood without judgment. Those minutes they spent together not only left a mark on Fabiano, but also made him question the choices he had made up to that point. After so many years of repressing his feelings, he began to feel a new desire to live, to open his heart. Fabiano took a deep breath, trying to contain the emotion that welled up inside him as he watched Anna, his little daughter, asleep in Lewin's lap. There was something almost magical about that moment. A calmness he hadn't felt in a long time, a peace he didn't even know was possible. He watched Lewin gently stroke Anna's hair, handling her as if she were something precious and fragile. Fabiano knew that his daughter had faced the absence of a maternal figure with a courage he couldn't even comprehend. Seeing that scene with Anna so calm and nestled was like feeling a part of his own soul heal alongside hers. In the days that followed, Lewin's presence became even more constant and, in a way, indispensable. She wasn't just visiting. She became part of the simple moments, the laughter, and even the quiet conversations that filled the house. She was there when Anna showed off her drawings and boasted about her artistic skills. She was there for the impromptu trips to the park and the deep conversations with Fabiano on those nights when the stars seemed brighter than ever. For Fabiano, each encounter with Lewin was a rediscovery. He found himself laughing at things that hadn't amused him before, sharing stories and secrets he'd kept to himself for so long. She was like a gentle breeze bringing freshness and hope, and he began to realize how dull and gray the days had been before her. Lewin, for her part, seemed genuinely interested in everything about him and Anna. This growing bond between them wasn't forced. It was as if an invisible connection had always been there, just waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Fabiano began to notice that, with Lewin around, he allowed himself to dream. He dreamed of a life where Anna's laughter, Lewin's stories, and his own hopes formed a harmonious symphony. He started looking at the future not as something uncertain or gloomy, but as a road he wanted to travel, one step at a time, with them by his side. With Lewin, life seemed more vibrant, more complete. The walls of the house, once mere witnesses to a solitary routine, were now wrapped in an atmosphere of warmth and laughter. And Anna, she blossomed. Her smiles were wider, her confidence stronger. She began to see the world through the eyes of someone who believes that love is safe, and Fabiano knew much of that came from Lewin's presence. Once, after returning from a trip to the park, Anna looked at Fabiano with a sparkle in her eyes and said, "Daddy, Lewin seems like an angel, you know?" The comment caught Fabiano off guard, and he found himself speechless, simply nodding and smiling because, in truth, that was exactly how he felt. It was then that Fabiano realized just how much Lewin was already a part of their lives. She wasn't just a pleasant companion. She was the support he and Anna had been needing, the safe haven that made life lighter and sweeter. Fabiano and Lewin lived a seemingly peaceful life, full of simple moments and a deep bond. They shared household tasks, enjoyed cooking together on Sundays, and had a tradition of watching an old movie every Thursday. For Fabiano, life with Lewin felt safe, a routine he cherished. But one day, something began to change, and this stability he valued so much slowly started to transform into a mystery. Being as observant as ever, Fabiano noticed that Lewin was different. At first, it was subtle, almost unnoticeable. Quick glances at her phone, nervous little laughs, or sentences she cut off mid-thought, as if she were hiding something. He tried to brush it off, telling himself it was just his imagination, but as the days passed, Lewin's behavior grew more noticeable and even strange. One day, while washing dishes after dinner, Fabiano heard Lewin's muffled voice coming from the hallway. She was on the phone, but her tone sounded tense, and he noticed she was whispering, something she never did at home. That whisper unsettled him. He felt as though something was being kept from him. When she finished the call and came back to the kitchen, Fabiano casually asked who had called. She looked away, giving a quick, vague response, one that he couldn't quite believe. Doubt began to creep into his heart, though he tried to act naturally. Days passed, and little by little, the strange feeling only grew. Fabiano noticed that some small objects around the house had started disappearing without explanation. His favorite mug, which he used every day, was missing from the cabinet. The keys to an important desk drawer, where he kept documents, had also mysteriously vanished. At first, he thought it might just be absent-mindedness. Maybe he'd misplaced a mug or put the keys somewhere else. But as the instances added up, he started connecting the dots. The turning point came when he found Lewin's jewelry box open, with some items missing. Fabiano decided to confront her, but he did so calmly, trying not to create a hostile atmosphere. He knew any accusations might make things worse, so he chose his words carefully. He asked if she knew where those missing items were. To his surprise, Lewin became visibly nervous, her voice shaky and her words coming out in a rush. She offered quick, almost rehearsed explanations, but something didn't add up. Fabiano knew her well, and it was clear she was trying to hide something. It was hard for him, someone so close to Lewin, to imagine that she might be involved in something she didn't want to share. He felt betrayed, but at the same time, he tried to rationalize her behavior, wondering if she was going through something difficult that she wasn't ready to talk about. Despite his growing doubts, he decided to wait and observe a little longer, wanting to give her the chance to open up on her own without pressure. Fabiano began noticing more details. Phone calls at odd hours, messages she quickly deleted, and how she avoided talking about her day. With each new sign, his suspicion grew, and he no longer knew whom to trust. It was an ordinary, almost monotonous afternoon when Joseane, with her usual sweet and innocent demeanor, sat beside Fabiano. She looked worried, but there was also a hint of curiosity in her eyes. Unaware of the tension her words would bring, she began to share something she had overheard. Joseane was a close friend of Fabiano's, and he'd always seen her as someone transparent, someone who couldn't keep a secret for long. So, when she started talking about Lewin, Fabiano automatically paid attention. After all, Lewin was a reserved person, always discreet about her affairs, but apparently not as much as she thought. Joseane mentioned, somewhat innocently, that she'd overheard a few odd conversations that perhaps weren't meant to be shared. She described in detail how Lewin seemed to be talking about something important, almost secretive, in a low voice, yet often enough that it began to catch her attention. Fabiano, she always speaks like that, as if she's afraid someone might hear, Joseane said, attempting to mimic the expression Lewin made while talking. A slight chill ran through Fabiano. He knew Lewin well enough to understand that if she was hiding something, she had a reason, and he couldn't think of a good one. With every sentence Joseane spoke, Fabiano grew more restless. He began mentally replaying every situation involving Lewin, recalling moments when she seemed distant or even uncomfortable, though he had never realized how significant it was. It was as if, suddenly, he was connecting the dots of a puzzle he hadn't even known he was piecing together. Joseane, still unaware of the weight of her words, continued describing specific details, like the names of people Lewin mentioned, names Fabiano had never heard before. This left him even more intrigued. He knew Joseane wasn't one to make things up, and at the same time, he felt an increasing urge to uncover what was behind these mysterious conversations. The atmosphere grew heavy. Fabiano looked around, making sure no one else was listening to their conversation. He leaned forward, almost whispering, and asked Joseane if she'd overheard anything that might shed a little more light on what was happening. She thought for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly, and said that she didn't know much yet, but she felt Lewin was involved in something that seemed to frighten even her. Unconsciously, Fabiano felt a chill in his stomach. Something was wrong, very wrong, and he knew he would have to dig deeper to find out what it was. It was a gray, calm afternoon when Fabiano decided to take a long walk through the park. He had already spent hours reflecting on his life, his dreams, and especially his doubts. Deep down, Fabiano knew something needed to change. He was tired of living without a clear purpose, of always feeling like he was caught between the fears of his past and the uncertainties of his future. Amidst all these thoughts, an idea began to take hold in his heart. He wanted to marry Lewin. Lewin was unlike any other woman Fabiano had ever met. Since their first encounter, he felt a sense of calm whenever she was near. There was a quiet strength in her, a steadiness that brought him a feeling of peace, something he could barely remember experiencing, even with the doubts that always haunted him. Something inside Fabiano told him she could be the missing piece that would bring him stability. It wasn't an overwhelming feeling of impulsive passion, but rather a steady warmth, a feeling of home. At the same time, Fabiano was afraid. What if he wasn't enough? What if he failed, as he had before? Despite his feelings for Lewin, his insecurities crept in, reminding him of past mistakes, failures, and fears of taking risks. But whenever he thought of Lewin, her calm expression and welcoming smile seemed to answer all those doubts without her needing to say a word. She was a grounded woman, someone who had faced life head-on and still maintained a serenity that seemed to embrace everyone around her. On the day Fabiano decided to propose to Lewin, his heart raced, as if it might leap out of his chest. He prepared meticulously, choosing words that would express just how much she meant to him. Carefully, he set the table for a special dinner at his home, making her favorite dish and decorating the space with soft lights. Everything was perfect, but Fabiano's hands were sweaty, and he found himself rehearsing his speech in his mind over and over again. When Lewin arrived, she brought with her that smile that warmed his heart, and it gave him courage. During dinner, he watched her closely, memorizing every detail. Her delicate gestures, the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about her plans, her easy laughter. Each of these details made him feel more certain that this was the right decision. Finally, Fabiano took a deep breath and gathered the courage to open up his heart. With a trembling voice, he confessed how much her presence uplifted him and how he believed they could build a solid future together, a fresh start for them both. Lewin, who had listened quietly, also shared the insecurities she carried. But at that moment, they felt a deep connection, a mutual understanding that went beyond words. Then, despite all the uncertainties, Fabiano knelt down and made his proposal. Lewin, moved, responded with a smile of complicity and acceptance. Right there, in that moment, doubts were replaced by the feeling that they were both ready to build something new, a life filled with affection, security, and hope. The rain beat against the windows, the sound of the drops blending with the stillness hanging in the room, creating an almost suffocating sensation. Fabiano felt the weight of that night, as if there were a storm not only outside but also within him. He and Vita sat across from each other, each lost in their own thoughts, the silence between them making the atmosphere even heavier. The two friends had been close for years, and their friendship had withstood everything, joys, losses, even arguments. But at that moment, Fabiano sensed that something was about to change forever. He tried to break the ice, made a joke about the weather, hoping to lighten the mood. But Vita didn't laugh. He remained serious, avoiding Fabiano's gaze as if he carried a burden he finally needed to share. Fabiano watched his friend take a deep breath before speaking, as though bracing himself for something painful. He could see in Vita's eyes a torment he'd never seen before. It was more than a confession. It was something profound, almost unbearable. "Fabiano," Vita began, his voice low and hesitant. "I need to tell you something about Lewin." Those words, spoken so cautiously, made Fabiano's heart race. He felt a chill in his stomach, a mix of anxiety and foreboding. In recent months, he and Lewin had grown close in an unexpected and intense way. Fabiano believed that finally, something beautiful was blossoming between them, a sincere connection built on care and companionship. However, it seemed that Vita was about to shatter that belief. "What is it?" Fabiano asked, trying to stay calm, though he felt his hands starting to sweat. He knew his friend well enough to sense that this wasn't something small. Vita took a deep breath, looking down at the floor, and murmured, "Lewin, she's pregnant." For a moment, Fabiano's heart stopped. He felt his blood turn cold, as if time had frozen around them. Pregnant? His mind began to whirl, trying to piece things together. And then Vita continued, almost in a whisper, "And the child is mine." It felt like a punch straight to the chest. Fabiano felt a wave of shock and disbelief, his world turning upside down in the blink of an eye. He almost laughed, thinking this might be some kind of cruel joke. But as he saw the serious and regretful look on Vita's face, he realized it was real. This was actually happening. The words echoed in his mind, replaying like a terrible song he couldn't ignore. Every moment he'd spent with Lewin flashed through his mind. Her smiles, their conversations, the silent promises. He wondered how he could have been so blind, how he hadn't noticed that something was wrong. His chest tightened, a mix of sadness and anger building up inside him. But Vita wasn't finished. "Fabiano, there's one more thing," he continued, his voice almost a whisper but heavy with immense weight. "Lewin getting close to you, it wasn't by chance. She planned everything, manipulated you. She wanted to make sure someone would be there for her if things didn't work out between us." Fabiano felt a chill run down his spine. That revelation was even more brutal. Lewin hadn't just deceived him. She had used his feelings to protect herself, as if he were nothing more than a pawn in her game. That thought made him feel small, vulnerable. It was as if all the affection he had nurtured had been a lie, a carefully laid trap just for him. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Fabiano lowered his head, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions inside him. He wanted to scream, to confront Vita, to demand answers. He wanted to know how his friend could have let him fall into such a situation. But more than anything, he wanted to understand how Lewin had been capable of manipulating him like that, playing with his feelings, taking advantage of his trust. Vita's gaze was now filled with regret, and he seemed to be waiting for a reaction from Fabiano, perhaps even a word of understanding. But Fabiano didn't know if he could forgive. The friendship they had seemed to be crumbling before his eyes, like a house of cards in the wind. He knew that, from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. As he stared into the void, his mind filled with memories. The first meeting with Lewin, the late-night conversations, the looks he thought were sincere. Everything now felt like a mirage, something constructed just to deceive him. He struggled to find an answer, a way to cope with the pain consuming him from within. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, searching for the strength to move forward. Even though anger and disappointment filled his thoughts, Fabiano knew that somehow he would have to find a way to start over, to move forward without carrying this pain as an eternal burden. But in that moment, the only certainty was the emptiness that remained, the silence invading every corner of the room and his heart. It was a cold winter morning, and Fabiano woke up feeling the weight of an emptiness that seemed to fill every corner of his chest. He got up slowly, his steps dragging as he made his way to the bedroom window. Outside, the sky was covered by a gray blanket of dense clouds, as if the weather itself was reflecting the storm brewing inside him. He took a deep breath, trying to push away the unrest that consumed him, but he knew it was impossible. Over the past few months, he had been ignoring the signs, closing his eyes to something that deep down he was beginning to understand. Lewin and Vita had been in his life for years, and he had always considered them part of his family. They were his confidants, the people with whom he had shared the most important moments, joys, challenges, and anxieties. But recently, something felt different. There was a distance, a coldness in their gestures and glances. Fabiano tried to ignore it, thinking it might all be in his head. However, with each meeting, that feeling grew, like a shadow slowly spreading, but with a firm grip. At times, he questioned his own sanity, wondering if he was overreacting, if it was his own insecurity crafting a narrative that wasn't real. But then he thought of his daughter, of the importance of providing her a safe home, surrounded by genuine people who truly cared about them. This was a promise he had made from the moment she was born. And when he thought of her, something deep within told him he couldn't keep ignoring it. One night, after much thought and rehearsing his words, Fabiano decided he couldn't put it off any longer. He needed to confront Lewin and Viter. He needed answers. The day was cold and gray, matching the seriousness of what was about to happen. He called them over for a talk at his home, and, sitting with them in the living room, he felt the weight of the words he was about to say. With a lump in his throat, he began expressing his feelings, sharing everything he had been experiencing, the anguish, the sleepless nights of distrust. He didn't want to believe that his friends, people he held in such high regard, could be hiding something so serious from him. Yet as he spoke, he noticed they avoided his gaze, and their responses were hesitant, evasive. Something inside Fabiano began to break. Then the truth came out like an unexpected blow. The betrayal that was revealed before him was more than he could bear. It felt like a deep stab, a pain that pierced his chest and spread through his whole being. His mind raced, searching for an explanation, but all he found was emptiness, the echo of a trust that had been shattered. He looked at Lewin and Viter, hoping to see some regret, some justification that might ease the wound just a little, but all he found was the weight of a bitter silence. Fabiano was paralyzed for a few minutes, unable to react. Anger, sadness, a sense of loss, all these emotions swirled within him. What he had feared most had come true, and it changed everything. It was as if the world around him had lost its brightness, leaving him in a solitary darkness. After a long moment, he took a deep breath and made a decision. It was the hardest decision he had ever made, but he knew there was no other choice. With a heavy heart and a determination he didn't know he had, he decided to cut ties with Lewin and Viter. That friendship, once so meaningful, now represented only a threat to what he cherished most, his own peace and his daughter's emotional well-being. Allowing them to stay in his life would put the future he dreamed of for her at risk. The first few days after the decision were hard. Fabiano felt lonely, as if he had lost not just friends but a part of himself. He wandered around the house, feeling the silence weigh heavily around him, and the pain of disappointment followed him like a shadow. But gradually, he began to realize that he had done the right thing. Each day was a small step away from that sadness and a step toward a healthier, more genuine life. As time went on, Fabiano started to rediscover the strength within himself. He realized that despite the pain, he was capable of moving forward, of rebuilding himself, and of providing his daughter with the home she deserved. He felt more secure, stronger, as if with every step he was shedding a burden. The betrayal by Lewin and Vita had been one of the most painful experiences of his life, but he knew that as difficult as it had been, it was necessary to protect those he loved most. Now, looking to the future, Fabiano felt a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. He had learned that sometimes, to protect those we love, we need to make heart-wrenching decisions that also pave the way for a new beginning. And with that certainty, he moved forward, leaving the past behind, ready to write a new story alongside his daughter, where love and loyalty were the only foundations that mattered. Once upon a time, in a small town filled with lush landscapes and warm smiles, there was a couple named Fabiano and Joseane. They were known for their contagious joy, always ready to help others and brighten the day of anyone who crossed their path. But behind their smiles and laughter, shadows followed them, an emotional weight that gradually began to feel unbearable. Recently, they faced a tragedy that shook their lives. They lost a loved one, someone who had been a shining star in their world. The pain of the loss felt like an immense void inside them, a wound that seemed never to heal. Fabiano often found himself lost in thought, reminiscing about happy moments that now felt distant and unattainable. Joseane, for her part, tried to be strong, but each day became a battle filled with tears and memories that wouldn't let her rest. One night, as they gazed at the stars, Fabiano turned to Joseane and said, "We need help. We can't keep going on like this." The words, though simple, were a cry for help, a recognition that the pain they felt was too great to face alone. They decided to start therapy sessions. For Fabiano, it was a daunting step. He had always been the protector, the one who saw problems. But deep down, he knew there was no shame in asking for help. Joseane, on the other hand, felt a mix of anxiety and hope. What would the sessions bring? Could they finally find the peace they so desperately desired? On the day of their first session, Fabiano's heart raced. They entered the therapy room, a welcoming space with soft lighting and comfortable furniture. The therapist, a woman with a warm smile and soothing voice, greeted them kindly. "Here, you can be completely honest. This is a safe space," she said, encouraging them to share their feelings. The first conversation was difficult. Fabiano began to talk about the pain he felt, as if he were opening a wound that had been forcefully closed. Each word was a drop of pain that dripped away, and as he spoke, tears began to roll down his face. Joseane, witnessing her husband's vulnerability, felt a knot loosen in her own heart. She too began to share her feelings, recalling the laughter, the hugs, and the moments that now seemed so distant. As the weeks passed, the sessions became a refuge. They learned to cope with their emotions, to acknowledge the pain without letting it consume them. The therapist taught breathing and meditation techniques that helped calm their restless minds. Gradually, the couple began to understand that grief was not a sign of weakness, but a part of the love they felt for the person they had lost. Each session brought new challenges, but also new discoveries. Fabiano and Joseane began to remember joyful moments, laughing at the memories while learning to let pain coexist with joy. They discovered it was possible to feel love and sadness simultaneously, like two sides of the same coin. Over time, they started to support each other in ways they never thought possible. One day, while sharing a special memory during a session, Fabiano had an epiphany. He realized that the person they had lost would want them to be happy again. This thought became a light amid the darkness, a beacon of hope that guided every step they took together. When they finally reached the end of their therapy sessions, Fabiano and Joseane were different. They were no longer just a couple who had lost something. They were now a couple who had found a new strength within themselves. With lighter hearts, they decided to honor the memory of their loved one in a special way, creating a flower garden that represented the love they felt, flowers that would bloom forever. Thus, Fabiano and Joseane learned that, although the pain of loss would never completely disappear, it was possible to live with it, transforming it into something beautiful. They discovered that love is a powerful force, capable of healing wounds and providing new beginnings. And as they looked up at the starry sky, they no longer saw just the pain, but also the shining memories, reminding them that there would always be light, even in the darkest moments. And so, with hearts full of love and gratitude, Fabiano and Joseane continued their journey, ready to embrace life and all it still had to offer. Fabiano had lost count of the nights he lay awake, motionless in his bed, staring at the ceiling of the dark room where shadows danced like a cold reminder of everything he had lost. It was always the same movie, without pause or end. Eduarda's smile, the way she filled the house with spontaneous laughter, her little quirks that he knew so well. It felt as though, at any moment, she would open the bedroom door with that look that said so much. But now the room was empty and he was alone. The memories were like waves wrapping around him, pulling him back into that same feeling of loss, an intense pain that reverberated in his chest. turning the silence of the night into a bitter echo. But amid this darkness, a small spark of light began to shine. It was a subtle light, almost imperceptible, but it insisted on staying lit, gently warming him like a sweet and comforting memory. And that light was their daughter. Every time he saw her smile, every laugh and innocent glance she threw his way, it was as if Fabiano's heart had a reason to beat stronger. His daughter ran around the house, filling the corners with a new energy, an innocence that lit up the space and made him realize that, despite everything, there was something good to live for. She had the same eyes as Eduarda, the same curious and vibrant expression, and it was as if, somehow, a part of Eduarda was still with him. With that, he found the strength he needed to get up each morning, to move forward, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. Fabiano understood that he needed to find a new purpose, not just for himself, but mainly for her, the daughter who now depended entirely on his love, his care, and his ability to smile again. He realized it was time to transform that unbearable pain into an unwavering strength. The longing for Eduarda became his purpose, and he decided he would dedicate his life to ensuring that his daughter grew up in a safe home, filled with love, where she could explore the world without fear. He began to map out plans for the future, not as an endless sequence of days to be endured, but as a road to be traveled, full of new possibilities. He returned to focusing on work with a determination he didn't even know he possessed, seeking stability that would allow him to build a solid foundation for his daughter. And Fabiano didn't just want to provide her with material comfort. He wanted the home to be a refuge of peace, where joy became a constant reminder that Eduarda's love lived there, even if in a different way. As the months passed, the pain began to settle, transforming into a serenity he never thought he could feel. Fabiano finally found peace, a peace that did not erase Eduarda's presence, but allowed him to keep her alive in his heart without it destroying him. He understood that moving forward did not mean forgetting, but learning to live in a new way, with new dreams and new goals. And in every moment of happiness he shared with his daughter, he felt that Eduarda was there, smiling at him through the child's eyes. Every step Fabiano took toward this new future was a small victory, a reminder that little by little, he was managing to rebuild his life. And realizing this, he felt truly good for the first time in a long while. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss other touching stories like this on Universe in Words. Leave a like and share with friends who appreciate stories of twists and overcoming challenges. The next story is sure to touch you as well. Until then,